A very warm welcome to you all to this, our first webinar on the platform we have just recently embedded. So thank you for the indulgence in receiving the correspondence you did with our requests to do certain things. We really appreciate that, and we hope that the new system is going to further enhance our value proposition to our valued partners and members. So thank you very, very much. This morning is important for two reasons. Firstly, we have Wayne with us, and as I mentioned earlier, secondly, is to have the opportunity to use our new system. Wayne is no stranger to all of us. We were privileged to host him way back in 2018 when I had to battle to clear the foyers of Norton Rose's offices in Sandton with people clamoring for personal insights from Wayne. And I'm sure he's going to do justice to the opportunity he's been given today. The fight against corruption in South Africa. No dinner party will be complete without people raising in some form or other the importance and the scourge and the debilitating effect it has on South African society and indeed globally. So today we're privileged to have Wayne with us. Wayne, I think, came to prominence in his stance against OUTA, and in doing so, endeared himself, I would say, to 85–90% of South Africans by virtue of what he was doing on our behalf. He didn't leave it there. He took upon, via OUTA, his organization, took it upon himself to take up the cudgels on many other lives of the citizens of South Africa, too many to mention. And it is indeed, Wayne, to people like yourself and organizations such as OUTA that we look to put our cause forward, to fight the fight against malfeasance, which threatens to erode the very value system of our country. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions. The fact that your discussions are going to be robust, I have no doubt that it's maybe going to encourage some rather insightful questions. Equally, I have no doubt. So Wayne, without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to you. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Just want to share my screen and I'm going to walk you through a presentation that I've prepared. And yeah, so let me just get that underway. Can you see that?
That's positive.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I titled this The Fight Against Corruption in South Africa. We're going to look at some of the trigger points, some of the solutions as we see them, and are we actually winning this? Can we win it? But to start off with, I just want to give you a brief overview of the background of OUTA's journey. We were born in 2012, so 9 years of civil activism, but I say unusual because we have decided to take on the issues that we have in a different way to normal NGOs. And we started out initially with this one mission to tackle and challenge Gauteng's e-toll scheme because it was grossly irrational. Given the options that were available to the state to widen the social infrastructure, it lacked public support and engagement. It was overpriced. There is corruption. We've uncovered that now. There's a lot more to uncover in that space. And it's a cumbersome and unworkable system. And you cannot have unworkable systems in the States. So what started out was as a legal challenge by business, because we gathered enough evidence to do so legally, we interdicted the launch, but it became technically too big to halt by the courts. And they didn't want to go there. And business capitulated on its fight. And that was a sad day for us around about 2013 as the scheme was being launched. And it forced us to reinvent ourselves. And so what was a legal fight initially by business became a civil disobedience campaign. Because I think the most important thing was not that we're opposed to public-private partnerships or widening of the roads or that the funds have to be paid for by society. None of that was relevant in our fight. It was because this was an unenforceable policy, and one doesn't want to live in a country where you introduce policies as the state that cannot work, that are unenforceable. So what we needed to do then was to encourage society to exercise their moral courage, to stand their ground on this matter. And so we set up this public defense umbrella to remove their fear, because there was a lot of fear in the minds of the people that, well, if this is a law and we transgress it, what are the implications? What are the consequences? But we had studied the history of national laws, and we've got a plethora of them in South Africa, the apartheid system itself, the past laws and how they were fought and how they were challenged to civil disobedience. And I think that saying, it is just so apt on this one, this matter, that unjust laws, we have an obligation as society to disobey them. So our pressure did prevail. I mean, we just saw this onslaught of government propaganda, and we exposed them as being absolutely meaningless and the lies that they were perpetuating around the scheme. We then tested their enforcement processes to the extent that they had to abandon them. So all the threats of not renewing your licenses, of getting criminal records, of being summoned, being blacklisted, having bad credit ratings, we tested every one of those, and they all came to naught. And what that then ensued was this compliance level that dropped from maxed out at 40% in June 2014. It needed 90% to achieve its goals. It didn't even get to 40, just under 40. And within a few months of the fight after the launch, it started to decline. Every month we saw it declining, and now sits at around 18%. Still people are paying, and sadly so. But anyway, what we did, though, in this whole process, we learned a lot about changing the dynamics of civil activism. I think we gave the public a sense of how to exercise their rights, and that challenging the abuse of power means when you start holding politicians to account, because civil activism and the NGO space generally exposes that which is wrong, but it doesn't go much further. And what we wanted to do as we changed OUTA's mandate in 2016 is to expand it and hold those who have abused their power to account. And it's not always easy because we can't prosecute, but there are a number of arrows in that quiver that we started to learn about and apply. But that's how we got to where we are. And let me move now on to the discussion of this state capture, the reality of it, the corruption that surrounded it. And from that, move into how do we address this? What are the solutions, and can we get where we want to go? So the state capture reality is that it's as simple as this. And I put the story in this way, that if just over a decade ago, you would never have imagined that a foreign family could ride into town and network their way to convince a sitting state president of their ideas and decisions, and then influence appointments of cabinet members, state-owned entity boards, CEOs and CFOs. And that was a reality. The Gupta leaks, which we had copies of in May 20, I've got a copy of that whole hard drive in May 2017, and we introduced those leaks into a well-built search engine and started finding so much information with Amar Bulganis and the Daily Mavericks of the world. And we saw very clearly the mails where the Guptas were forwarding on the CVs and the names of people like Mosebenzi Zwane and people on the various boards to be appointed, to put Gigaba into Treasury and so on. It was absolutely amazing at how sometimes these ministers and people who are going to be appointed to senior executive positions didn't even know it, but the Guptas knew ahead of time. They knew the dates, they knew everything. So just the mind boggles. And then what they did was manipulated the procurement processes, inflated the contracts, and lastly, they were also assisted by international firms, the Bains of the world, the KPMGs, the McKinseys, and so on. And this essentially just enabled the Gupta brothers to come into town and leave a decade later with 15 billion rand of a personal fortune, That's what they got out of it. Yes, there was over 50 billion rand that was moved into and flowed in and out of accounts, but that was their cut. And that is just mind-boggling. And that there is just the Hindi quote for "Thank you very much, South Africa." They left town, sit nicely and comfortably in Dubai now, and we've paid for this heavily. So let's just unpack this then. Well, what is the anatomy of corruption? I mean, how does this happen? And one senses and understands that greed is a big element, but it's not the main cause of corruption. I think as human beings, as our nature is to desire for more than what we have or need. That is a given. If you're given the opportunity and you take it, you do very often. Greed is not the motive, though, for corruption. It is to help others to gain. So if you unpack it, for corruption to thrive, and that's what state capture is about, and what it is still today, in whatever form it is, it needs to have these elements of dishonest people. It needs to have those people in positions of authority, and then it needs to ensure that processes and activity are put in place for illicit gain or illicit benefits. And when you put those three together, you start to control it, you get this anatomy of corruption. Dishonest people in places and positions of authority, enabling illicit benefits. And there's a formula for corruption. Basically boils down to when the gains are greater than the fines or penalties, and you multiply that by the likelihood of prosecution. And so if these two areas of penalties and likelihood of prosecution are diminished, and the gains are there, that's the formula for corruption to start growing. The anatomy then of state capture is to reduce the threat of penalties and prosecution, and that means that you need to hijack the criminal justice system, and then you need to make available the gains, which is basically rent seeking. And in the state capture space, it took this form. You need to remove those threats and put people in authority to halt accountability that will obviously be exposed through civil society and journalists. And so what they set out to do was to ban the Scorpions, cancel them. In 2008, it was disbanded, a Zuma initiative. This was a very powerful independent entity dealing with priority crimes, tackling politicians at the same time. Jacob Zuma was in their sights, and they had to do away with that. They did so through an act of Parliament, voted on it, a massive vote obviously in favor of, because they were instructed to do so. They then set out to introduce a tame hawks, so they needed to replace priority crime interventions with some entities. The Hawks was born, and Zuma acolytes were appointed in the form of Anwar Dramat and Burning and Clemenza. Anwar Dramat was removed. It was an appointment that was proven in court to be illegal, and Clemenza was appointed, and he too was removed, but through a court process. But in the meantime, a long time had passed, and the Hawks were really just looking the other way. They had to capture the NPA, and Kwazulu Natal, in 2013 was appointed. Sean Abrams thereafter. Again, Kwazulu was found wanting, and that appointment illegal. Sean Abrams was put there. He was a puppet, and the state capture and the capture of the NPA ensured that prosecution would never happen against those found wanting in the whole state capture process. But the beauty of all of this is that it creates a false sense of security to those who plunder. And what we saw was that people became brazen. People thought that Jacob Zuma and this environment of capturing would be in place forever. and that was not to be. And what happens, they get careless and they leave their digital fingerprints everywhere. And another big area was obviously the state security had to be hijacked, and this enabled them to spy on their opponents, understand their strategies, and undermine and deflect those who opposed the state capture cabal before they could even act. And even organizations like ourselves, our phones were tapped and we were listened to all the time so that you could understand which way we were going and what our strategy was. So capturing the and controlling the rent side means, you know, that where the gains are greater than those penalties. Obviously, you don't just go and diminish the criminal justice system and then not start plundering. You need to also control the opportunities. And this they did by putting people in authority again. So it comes back to that, people in authority to enable these and increase the gains. Started with SARS. They needed to reduce the oversight. There were a lot of VAT transgressions, and they had to close down this illicit trade focus that SARS had, the special unit. And SARS was also going after Jacob Zuma for not paying his tax, and so they had to intervene there, and they moved the authorities out. That were doing a great job there. Ivan Pillay was even had Zuma in his sights, and they put Tom Moyane in, and the National Treasury, obviously the purse strings of the country. They needed to enable funds to flow to SOE. So Jacob Zuma in 2010 announced a massive infrastructure development program, being roads and stadiums and a lot of construction that was going on. And those funds had to flow, as well as to municipalities, by the way, who get a lot of grants from Treasury, state departments, and Treasury's oversight role needed to be diminished. And so we saw what was happening with Tlantla Nene, with Pravin Gordhan, and the appointments of Gigaba and Des van Rooyen. All of those antics unfolded. The next area was then to get their hands on money that flowed into these developmental agencies or these state-owned entities, which they said we're going to be doing a lot of this development. SANRAL, South African Airways, Transnet, Eskom, Denel, just to name a few. These are the big ones. They controlled the appointment of boards, CEOs and CFOs, and they hijacked the procurement process and inflated pricing and enabled prices to be inflated dramatically. And then lastly, this gives this a lot of agencies. When you open these entities for business and you bring in the KPMGs to justify, and the McKinseys and the Bains and the banks that were looking in a way allowing so much of this illicit money flow to take place, are all part of this. It gives the whole process agency when you see reports by KPMG and that. And I just think that the corporate profits just clouded their judgment. The greed sets in there, and massive bonuses are paid because of billions of rands being earned for no work done. No work done at all. And so that is, I mean, state capture, that's how simple it was. That's what happened. It unfolded over a 10-year period, and it's real. The state capture story is real. It is being unpacked at the Zondo Commission, and that is history. We know it. But is it really history? And this is where I want to talk about the solutions and what has to happen, because it only becomes history if we, including the state, make it so. And we have to work hard now at these trigger points that I want to unpack now for the solutions to fighting the scourge of corruption. Are we on the right road? And you'll see why I think we are, but far from over. So what are the trigger points for the solutions to the fight against corruption? Well, if you unpack what we've gone through and then reverse that, you come to a very important element, which is accountability. We have to improve the mechanisms of accountability. So the reversal of state capture damage that was done at the NPA, the Hawks Special Investigations Unit and State Security Agency is essential. And unless we do that, or unless the state does that properly, then we're going to struggle to deal with accountability. There are other ways. But those are very important if we're going to do it properly. To introduce independence into priority crime investigations. Priority crime is what corruption is all about, especially when it manifests itself in day-to-day activities, when it becomes endemic in society. And so we need to tackle those through an independent organization. We have to reinstate credibility into the public protector. What was nice as citizens, we got a taste of what a good public protector does in Thuli Madonsela. Nobody knew the public protector before that. Very few people had heard of the prior public protector. And then we see what happens when Thuli Madonsela is replaced by Bosisiwe Mqobane. What happens where that institution who's supposed to protect us as citizens from the abuse of power doesn't get involved and doesn't do her work or their work properly. So we need to reinstate that as one of the other solutions, and then to introduce credible commissions of inquiry, and then also address the corruption that takes place in the political landscape. So in short, that area of where the criminal justice system is, we needed to improve the penalties and the likelihood of prosecution if we are going to reintroduce and deal with accountability. And accountability is critical in the fight against corruption. The other area is transparency, and we say this, transparency is the enemy of corruption. The more, and you see all the stuff that's happening is normally done under cloak and dagger. It's done behind the scenes. A lot of the procurement you find out afterwards, but the money's gone. And so we say that if we can stop misspending before it happens, before money changes hands, then we're able to put the brakes on corruption, so we can stop it. And I always talk about this story where would 48 million rand have been spent on 9 pit toilets, by the way, in the Eastern Cape, had the community known about that? We believe not. The flags would have been raised very early, the culprits would have been exposed, and those that are in authority, and a lot of them that are in the right place to put the brakes on, would have acted. But it's very difficult to do so once that money is spent. And that's why we really need to increase and improve this area of transparency. That means we need to develop absolute transparency in procurement processes and the exposure mechanisms within the entities. It's so important that we get on top of this, and it's probably the biggest amount of work that needs to be done. And then we also need to, in this transparency space, address political interference and catered deployment. And if we can start getting that right, those areas raise the aspect of transparency to fight corruption. So, but that's in the state side. I mean, a lot of work has to be done in the state side. In civil society side, transparency also means ensuring press freedom and supporting credible media. And we've seen some very interesting dynamics in that space. And I'll unpack that now. We also need to support and grow a strong, organized civil society entities that can do the work that so often business and government and people in authority are afraid to do. We need to introduce stronger and better citizen oversight into procurement. We've got to fight for that, and we need to expose and remove corrupt politicians, especially through the electioneering processes. Many ways to skin the cat are fixing South Africa, and one of them is that. And so, and on top of that, we need to bring Parliament, pressure to bear on Parliament to do its work properly. And it's at this juncture that I start to say, well, do you think Avis and Zuma and Gigaba and that crowd are sleeping well lately? And our view is not. Without a doubt, things are happening. And who would have said a year ago that Ace Magashula would have criminal charges laid against him? He's in court in August. He's already been in court to answer the initial charges. Who would have said that he would be kicked out of the ANC? And those realities are unfolding as we speak. When we spoke about these in dealing with the hopelessness, the feeling of hopelessness that coming out from our supporters, that nothing could be done. We could see in the background that things were happening and they would happen, they would unfold this way. And so that's we were. And we shouldn't be these things will happen, and that's exactly what's happening. But we are frustrated, and the question is, are we winning? I always make this point that, you know, turning a big tanker, back, turning, and that's what's actually happening here. What is unfolding in South Africa is nothing that can be done by the flick of a light switch. This doesn't happen. The repair in the criminal justice system after being hollowed out for a decade will not happen overnight. It's going to take a while. But what are the signs? What are the signals that says we're on the right direction? Are we? And these are some of the signs that solutions are starting to unfold. And then looking back now at those foundations of accountability that are being built, the repairing of the hawks and uncapturing the NPA and state security, we believe that is happening. If you look at Shamila Batoy, the work that Andy Motibi is doing in SIU, the Hawks head, new appointments there with the deputy head, and then Ayanda Dlodlo in state security, moving out those who were deeply complicit. I think these are all good moves. Are they acting fast enough? Are they doing enough? Not yet. But this I liken to the Operation Car Wash in Brazil. There was a lot of work that was done behind the scenes. There was a lot of build-up that had to happen, and then the floodgates opened, and so you start to see accountability unfolding. And in our engagements, in the back doors of the corridors of these entities, we are seeing some big stuff and big cases being finalized, and we believe that you're going to start seeing real good, strong accountability flowing in that regard. If you look at the independent directorate appointment, focusing on priority crimes, Hermione Cronier's appointment has been an excellent one. And again, a lot being built. And not fast enough as far as we're concerned. The new processes are being put in place to remove a rogue public protector. Bosisiwe Mkhwebane is under immense pressure to be removed. Not only that, Parliament has agreed on processes to go through the motions of having her removed through Parliament, and there's also cases with the NPA on perjury charges against her unfolding, and it's good to see that now processes are being put in place. And remember, this is not a case of, and so often we hear people saying, well, why doesn't Cyril Ramaphosa just instruct the NPA to do their work? He can't, and he's not allowed to, and he shouldn't be allowed to. And so the building blocks of keeping independence in those spaces is now in place to ensure that you can't just have this political interference from the top. So long as proper structures in place to get the right people into those positions, and that's what's unfolding here. And then credible commissions of inquiry, they are working. You know, we get a lot of concerns that the State Capture Commission is just a waste of time and money, but it isn't. We've had the SARS Commission, which has done some excellent work and more work flowing from that. This State Capture Commission under Zondo has been extremely beneficial to the work that has to flow from this. Without it, we would have had civil society and journalists and media houses connecting the dots, but you still see a bland picture that doesn't really make sense all the time. And the Zondo Commission has put color into it, shown the depth and the gravitas of what has happened, allowed whistleblowers to come forward in a safer environment. And so from this, work will flow. the prosecution processes, because there's just so much information that would not have flowed had we not had this commission. And then the reversal of the Arms Deal Commission, that was an absolute farce under Judge Sariti. That has been trashed. It has been ruled as irrelevant now. The judges are being questioned and held to account, and all the rulings and things that flowed from that commission on the arms deal have been undone. So that was excellent work. And then this political interference and catered deployment. Now, I'm not sure whether enough is done there, but what we do see now is party funding transparency being signed off in courts. That would never have been happened during Zuma's years. Catered deployment is now being discussed and openly by the president himself. These are strong statements that are being made. Are they enough? Well, we're not sure. Political interference, we believe, is going to be there for some time, but it's a move in the right direction. I think these are the good signs that we've been looking for and asking for a long time, but we have a question mark there as to whether it's enough yet. But let's watch that space. In addressing transparency, our role is to encourage transparency through society, as I said, and what are we doing in that space? Well, there are credible developments in the media space. Those with agendas are dying, and we need to keep a very independent and strong media environment. And just 6-7 years ago, the Daily Maverick was struggling to get launched. It was under pressure. It was being targeted and almost hijacked. Today, it is a strong and probably one of the most credible media houses in this country, exposing corruption and sharing and giving really good and meaningful news. And I think what's important about this is there's so much happening in social media that you don't know where to turn to so often. What is right, what is real these days. And when you turn to credible media houses, if a credible media house who has well-trained journalists puts out statements, you start to believe them more and or realize that those are the sources of meaningful information. So News 24 is still in that space. Times Media went through a serious wobble with its support of the rogue unit, the SARS rogue unit. They've had to get rid of some journalists, and they lost a lot of credibility. I think they're building their way back into the credible. IOL and independent news is going the other way. We saw the demise of ANN7, and so we think there's some really good stuff here. And I just want to harp a little bit on this SABC board. The South African broadcasting or SABC, what is it? I don't know what the C stands for, but it'll come to me now. But TV 1, 2, 3, and the 11 languages, radio stations around the country. This entity is critical and it's necessary, and it's gone through massive upheaval when political interference took place with Hlaudi Motsoeneng's appointment. But what has happened is that board has done a lot of good work. They've started to challenge government. They started to push back to government interference. And you saw a few years ago that the state wasn't happy with the way they were going. I mean, they were having to deal with things like right-sizing SABC, taking out surplus staff, and again, government started to interfere, and the board, who had taken a judgment that had happened in the last couple of years to heart, had said, no, we have the courts on our side, you cannot interfere. And guess what happened? The Minister of Communications then instructed 5 out of the 9 board members to resign, which they did. They were the puppets, but the 4 that didn't resign stood their ground. And instead of being told, well, you're not correct, they stood their ground and said, well, you have to make those appointments, otherwise we're going back to court. Fortunately, sanity prevailed in the president, Ramaphosa. He forced the state and cabinet to make those appointments, and now you have a Corate board that is strong, that are basically telling government to butt out of SABC's affairs, stop interfering. This is an independent institution, and it will do what it has to do, whether it's popular or not, whether the Labour partners of the ruling party don't like it or not. They have to retrench, they have to fix this organisation, and we actually have to commend them. We had a serious session with that board members recently and learned a lot about the good work that's being done there. So these are excellent developments. I think the development of organised civil society's voice and its growth and its recognition as well is critical to encouraging transparency. I mean, just besides OUTA and corruption watch, Section 27, Helen Suzman Foundation, these entities get stronger. But what's more encouraging for us now, and it didn't happen in the past, and that is the invitations by Parliament to present, to be part of input now into Parliament's affairs, and that is a very, very encouraging thing. It never happened until the last couple of years. Citizen oversight into procurement, it is now more welcome than before, but we need to have more of that. But we sit on the National Anti-Corruption forums that are developing now. Recently, Peter Becker was appointed. He's a civil activist, an anti-nuclear energy activist. He is on the board of the National Nuclear Regulator. And this is good news because you have oversight from civil society, and we're going to be pushing for more of these civil society appointments onto the boards of these state-owned entities. And then this issue about removing corrupt politicians and the local elections that are looming. Well, I don't have to tell you, but that Ace Magashule and that entire corrupt cabal are now under massive pressure. And to hear Cyril Ramaphosa recently making a statement that said, you know, we are going to have these local elections as much as the EFF and everybody wants to push them out. And he encourages society to remove corrupt politicians in the local election. Now, who would have thought that the ruling party who's in charge of most of these municipalities would say something like that? He's basically telling society, vote those corrupt politicians, ANC or not, out of power. These are very, very positive developments. And then our pressure to empower Parliament to do its work is gaining a lot of traction. Parliamentary oversight, there is a program unfolding there, and the electoral reform that we were part of a court case that ruled on the constitutional basis or the constituency basis of elections in the next major elections has to be in place, and Parliament has to pass a new law to ensure that independence can stand. That is massive, but we want to see how that unfolds. So the question is are we there yet? Well, this road is long, and we're on the right track. We certainly believe we are, but the ANC is struggling to self-correct. We can see that, and there are new political pressures underway, and they have to. If they don't, they are in big trouble. But we are compounded by this economy that is at a breaking point, and these things start to play in our favor as society because the pressure to correct now is high. It's not like there's a cupboard full of money that can still be spent. And when you add all of this together, you get the sense that there is positive action unfolding, and we can see it. We can see that the decisions and the comments and the things that are unfolding are in the right direction. But we have to seize the day as civil society. We've got to take this momentum now and keep it going. We cannot allow the status quo of the past to become our reality and to become our norm. We have to reverse that. The mindset of corruption's here to stay, has to stop. Or that's just the way it is, and let's learn to live with it. That is absolute nonsense. We have to break down this thinking that we're in in a state that we can't get out of. So giving up must never be an option for business and society as a whole. But we are far from being on top of it. We can't rest on our laurels. We've got a long way to go. Reducing corruption is a long, drawn-out journey, and it requires resilience, it requires tenacity, it requires time, but more importantly, it requires more people, and especially business, to become active citizens and to stop this, profit at all costs, profit at the expense of society. We have to take a new moral, introspective look at how we do business in South Africa. This is not other parts of the world. Here, we cannot allow big business to get involved and be operating on the other side of the corruption coin when it comes to the state. And if that means losing favor with the state or being struck off the procurement rolls, well, it's a high price to pay. We understand that. But the higher price to be paid is that of the KPMGs and the McKinseys and the Bains of the world. They die and they are under a lot of pressure. So you've got to make those choices. So I think that's the end of my talk. Let's get into the discussion, and let me just show you that these are the realities of what is coming soon to a prison in your area. Well, we hope so. We think we're on that track. A lot of people don't believe us. I think we're on our way there. That's me for now, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Wayne. That's for those insights. Robust as always, controversial, certainly, but I think these are the issues that need to be uppermost in our mind. Business clearly has a very important role to play, and we can no longer sit back and just consider that it's someone else's problem. We need to be involved in the process of bringing back the moral high ground that the people of South Africa deserve. Folks, I have no questions in the chat line. Please use the raise your hand facility. I'm going to kick off, if I may, Wayne, with a question. It has been suggested that the companies such as Bain and McKinsey, who are making these well-publicized financial reparations, it's all very well. But what about a different form of penalty? Paying 870 million rand makes one think is just how much did they score? Your thoughts, please.
Well, exactly. We don't like the fact that pay back the money and everything's okay. Those people in those positions of power who knew what was going on. You don't get, for instance, at ABB, a duplicate payment or payments that add up to an excess of 1.8 billion rand, and then say, oh, sorry, no, we didn't realize it was duplicate payment. We'll give you the money back. That was corruption. So what we want to see are those individuals being held to account, being tried for their crimes against the state. The Companies Act is very clear on that, and to face the penalties. Because when that happens is when business puts in place processes that says no corruption. If I'm a director of this company, there'll be no corruption on my watch because I'm going to be held accountable. So we need to see accountability of those individuals in those companies. Not just a case of pay back the money, go to court and go to jail if you're guilty.
Thanks very much for that comprehensive response, Wayne. I see a hand raised. Craig, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Mike, and thank you, Wayne, for you and your organization's work in this area. There's no doubt that you've had a lot of painful times through this process, but you have made a difference, and I think that is appreciated out there. And thanks for the presentation. I think to have it in a nice, concise format like this is very useful. I agree. We can see movement, we can see progress. Many people start saying, well, it's not fast enough. Well, that, as you say, some things are going well, some they could be a bit faster, but at least we've seen progress. But the concise picture you put there, I think, helps to give that additional hope. Just one other comment with regards to money being available. The economist Kevin Lings has got a very interesting graph which shows corporate deposits and how they've grown over the years. And there's money in the country, no doubt about it. You just need the confidence for it to get spent and get spent properly. And I think if it turns around, you can get to that point. So I guess my one question is, you make mention of elections. What do you think is the possibility of there being a change coming up in the local elections? Do you think people will vote and make that change in the elections? Just interested in your perspective on that one.
It's a good one. So, sadly, local elections don't have the turnout that they need. And the biggest problem is the youth are not participating as much as they should. Having said that, I think this local election is going to be a bit different. The collapse of municipalities is impacting on everybody. It's dire, and the exposure of corruption in the last few years since the last election has been real for many people. So I think it's going to be interesting to see the turnout. What political players are there? Well, they are still only the three main ones. COPE and others are not there anymore. If they are, they're small. 85%, 90% of the votes will go to ANC, EFF, and the DA. Now, the biggest worry is that the EFF gets traction because the ANC is in the space of self-correction and failure and these fallouts that are happening. But if we unpack it, I mean, the DA obviously, I think, have shot themselves in the foot. Had they been more representative, they could have seized more towns, I believe. But it's a sad situation. They've lost their representation from a demographics point of view, with Musi Maimane, John Moody going here, and recently. I forget her name. She's a stalwart in the organization, and then you've lost Herman Shaba. So that's opened the door, by the way, for a new dynamic, and that is the independent candidates, and there are movements afoot. And essentially, what we are working with a number of residents associations, and as well as, but without getting into the politics of it, because we want to remain apolitical. But One South Africa, under Musi Maimane and Herman Mashaba's Action Party, are basically going and saying, here's alternatives at local government level. And this idea that you can actually form political parties in local government just in your own town, so that you can capture the proportional representative seats and not just stand as an independent, but stand as a coalition of independents and win back your towns. This is happening right now in Grahamstown, Matana, and in many towns. And so what we're going to see is, I think, more of that, more of independence, and more citizen involvement in taking control of municipalities, either through the electoral process and or through legal processes, which is the one area that we're driving, and possibly what we call these organized tax revolts in local government, which is not always good and nice, but if it's controlled, and OUTA is about to launch its community action network platform, which empowers and enables local organized civil society, indigenous groups, residents associations, business chambers, to be able to understand how to challenge local government, to set up real legal challenges, to take them on in the repairs and the infrastructure upgrading that is required. So interesting dynamics developing there. But yeah, we've just got to convince the youth to vote. But hopefully it's not along the lines of, well, our only best alternative to the ANC is the EFF, because that would be jumping from the frying pan into the fire. They are as corrupt, if not more corrupt, than the ANC.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for that question, Craig. And Wayne, thank you for that enlightening response. Direct and frank as always, and I think that's has become your hallmark, Wayne, and I think the communities represented here today appreciate that frankness and forthrightness. We want to know where we stand. South Africa deserves better. Do we have any more questions? I'm very conscious of time and Wayne's need to leave promptly at 12. So we have 5 minutes. Any questions? I have nothing in the chat box. Do you have anything on your side, Ariel?
Mike, maybe if I can just ask one more if there are no others. And that just comes down to the funding of your organization, Wayne, as to what you managed to do and achieve on that front.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So civil society always struggles with funding, but I think we got a model that works for us. It's, we had to move away from relying on big business funding, which is how OUTA started. And then government lent on them and messy. So we turned to civil society with a crowdfunding model, and we had to introduce a process that says, look, we can't employ the professional people we need to do this fight unless we have longevity. We can't do it on one-off donations. So we introduced, rather than one-off, a debit order system. Rather than give us R1,000 a year, as individuals, give us 100 Rand a month. Rather than a business give us $5,000 a year, give us 500 Rand a month or 400 Rand a month. And that's worked, but it's plateaued. We should be double our size. We've got 44 staff. I mean, we should have 100 people. There's so much coming at us, and we just have to turn away so much obvious work that we can do because whistleblowers give us good information. So it is about, just appealing to business, to small business. We very seldom get funding from outside donor institutions. We are looking to one. The European Union might be helping us give a lot more traction to this community action network we're launching. But other than that, focused funding for one big project, all our work with our legal experts, our investigators, and our project managers is funded by, we've got about 23,000 supporters out there. We really would hope that should be at about 100,000 by now. But, it's like civil society's funding, it's not apathy, it's not learned apathy. It's just that people like the work we do, but don't often know that we rely on them to fund us. And this notion often slips in that says, well, what's my 100 Rand going to do? And we have to remind people that the biggest mistake is made by those who do nothing or give nothing because they can only give a little. It's the culmination of all those littles that makes us possible. So 70% of our funds goes to paying the salaries of our staff, the rest to rent and everything else. We have a litigation war chest that we've built up so we can take cases on fast. But the long and short of that response is, with more we can do more, and we really would encourage you and your members and your colleagues to just go into the outa.co.za website, outa.co.za. It's very easy. You join here, it takes 5 minutes, and you can choose whatever amount you want to donate each month. And we would value that. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Wayne. Craig, thank you for those, as always, your incisive questions. That brings us to a close. I'd like now to call on Greg Carolyn, the founding partner of DPI, managing partner of DPI International, for some concluding remarks and a vote of thanks. Over to you, Greg. Please unmute.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Mike, for giving me the privilege to sort of wrap it up today. Wayne, thanks very much for your insights and your presentation today. What you have done is highlighted that business is not immune to corruption. Business is one of the protagonists in the whole state capture process. So it's key for business to address corruption with a very strong and heavy hand. I think as business leaders, we need to ask, what can we do to address the inherent risk of corrupt activities manifesting in our business across our operating model? Because it's not always just in procurement that these things happen. We need to look across the model. You mentioned that greed is not the main cause of corruption, even if it is one of the 7 deadly sins. But you showed the formula for corruption to work. It needs certain building blocks to thrive. It needs the dishonest people. It needs them to be in a position of authority. And then it needs to enable the illicit benefits for those protagonists. So for it to flourish, it needs that the gains of corruption need to be bigger than the penalty times by the likelihood of prosecution. So as business, what do we do? Because we have to address it. It has to be something that we have to root out of what we do on a day-to-day basis. So we need a strong stance on corruption as business. We need improved mechanisms for accountability across the operating model. We need to ensure that we don't victimize the whistleblowers. We expose the corrupt activities. Yep. We need to ensure and encourage transparency with clear communication when this corruption is identified, and make sure that our processes are clear as to how these rogue activities will be dealt with, but also be clear on the penalties and the prosecution process that will be followed. And then once we found the guilty ones, remove the protagonists, not just from the business, but in the value chain, so that it doesn't happen elsewhere. And we cannot be blasé. We have to stay vigilant. So in summary, I think swift action is always key. So once again, Wayne, thanks very much for your insights and your presentation today. We look forward to seeing the outcomes of the hard work being done by OUTA. We know that it's a long and frustrating journey and tenacity is required, but the bulldog never gives up. Just keep chomping at it. So thanks very much again.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much for those closing remarks, Wayne. Once again, from Second Jam, on behalf of our members and partners, thank you for always being so willing to address us. And please, we remind all our members, partners, and Second Jam friends, be on the lookout. We have a number of more events lined up over the next few weeks. So please visit our social media platform, our website, www.secondjam.com. And I look forward to hosting you at our next event. Have a wonderful day. And Wayne, once again, thank you very much. Oriel, to you for your support. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. All the best, folks.
Bye all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye now.